The last emperor of Russia, Nicholas II, was crowned in 1896. 35 years previously, Nicholas's grandfather Alexander II had cancelled the feudal institution of serfdom that had enslaved most of the country's ethnically indigenous population for about 200 years. These liberal reforms had left an enormous peasant population without land, in a country where the people had no education, where industrialization was not taking place sufficiently fast to accommodate the population's need for jobs, and where the monarchy held absolute power without a representative parliament. Clearly, something had to give. Socialism was everywhere on the rise. At this time, it became very popular in Russia for middle-class and bourgeois young people to go into the rural areas and spend time educating the illiterate peasant population about Marxism. Armed with this new historical perspective, the peasants became more and more aware of their centuries of oppression. They were used to governing themselves democratically on a local level, and they could not fail to see the injustice in a corrupt oligarchic monarchic system of rule that often left them to starve. Peasant revolts swept the land. In 1904, Russia went to war with its relatively tiny but powerful neighbor Japan. And in a completely unexpected coup, the small island nation decimated Russia's powerful fleet. On this backdrop, the First Revolution happened. To keep the monarchy from toppling altogether, in 1905, Nicholas II was forced to accept for the first time ever in Russia's history a system of checks and balances on his ultimate authority. A parliament was formed and a constitution ratified. The royal family also undermined its authority by allowing itself to be publicly influenced, even in political matters, by the mysterious figure, the unwashed and uncouth peasant mystic Grigory Rasputin. We will have to address him separately in another video. In 1914, World War I broke out with the declaration of war against Russia by Germany. Russia's participation in the war spelled the end of its imperial days and a new world order everywhere. The war dragged on for years, sapping the country's resources and morale. Many people in Nicholas's own government and even his extended family were increasingly unhappy about the way he ruled. They felt he was short-sighted, too entangled in his family affairs to be an effective ruler, especially in wartime, and he was also considered sly and untrustworthy, known to take a passive position publicly while pulling strings behind the scenes. One day in late February 1917, well, actually it was February according to the old style, but March according to the new style. See our video on Christmas and New Year's for an explanation of the calendar. Nicholas's train was stopped and boarded by armed officers of his own army, who forced him at gunpoint to abdicate the throne. He did so in favor of his brother Mikhail. Mikhail was no fool, however, and he could smell the bloody stench of revolution in the air. He immediately refused to take on his brother's dangerous position, and power went to the parliament. Thus, the so-called provisional government was formed, and after 1,000 years of monarchic rule, Russia became, for the first time, a republic. This became known as the Februari Revolution. Being representative of the population, the parliament was mostly made up of different socialist factions. In the ensuing 6 months, as the provisional government tried to continue fighting the war while establishing a republican system of rule within the enormous empire, various revolutionaries assembled in the capital, which was then St. Petersburg, and set about creating another coup, one that was to overthrow the provisional government. Among these were Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky. We'll have to explore them in a separate video also. In November in the new style, Lenin's and Trotsky's Bolshevik party maneuvered its way to the top of the democratic multi-party government. One of the many socialist factions, the word Bolshevik means majority. The Bolsheviks immediately negotiated a separate peace with Germany, and nationalized the property and land in the country, under the auspices of it becoming the property of the people. Land to the peasants, as Lenin had promised. Leon Trotsky's creation, the Red Army, set about fighting their own war, the war for enforcement of Soviet rule in the Russian Empire. The Russian Civil War lasted 5 years and carried away the lives of several million citizens. But by the end of it, the empire was largely reassembled, and in 1922 the USSR was formed with its own new democratic constitution. A constitution that has been criticized by Vladimir Putin for allowing the member states of the Soviet Union to secede at will. In 1918, as collateral damage in the Civil War, the royal family was summarily executed. Despite the fact that they were directly related to all the royal houses of Europe, no one made any attempts to save them. They were shot in a cellar, children, servants, and all, and dumped in an abandoned mine shaft. In 1998, the closest living relatives of the last royal family of Russia, Queen Elizabeth II of Great Britain and her husband Prince Philip, came to Russia to provide samples of their hair for comparative DNA testing to conclusively identify the remains of Nicholas's family. There is so much more to know and understand, dear friends, so keep coming back, and we'll see you next time on Understand Russia.